Well, hello everyone. It's John Lockland here. I'm the director of FVD International, Forum for Democracy International, speaking to you this week, as you can see, from Amsterdam, from the heart of the historic centre. We're delighted to have as our guest this week, together with my co-hosts Peter Lavelle from Moscow and Jeremy Nell from Cape Town in South Africa, Sasha Latypova, who joins us from Nevada, from the snowy wastelands of Nevada.
Not quite a wasteland.
I assume they're snowy, and I assume you're
It's snowy,
far away from all human life, or I don't know, maybe you're not. Anyway, Sasha, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be talking about COVID. COVID's a big subject for us. The party leader Thierry Baudet campaigned very energetically against the lockdowns and so on in 2021, when there was a general election in the Netherlands, and wrote a book about it, The COVID Conspiracy. Which is published in English. So we're delighted to have you, Sasha, on this important issue. We've already had a broadcast a couple of weeks ago with your friend Debbie Lohman, who I believe you work with. Sasha, tell us how you got involved in this whole issue.
Well, about overall in COVID. So I'm a private citizen. I'm not affiliated with any parties. So I was actually retired from my primary job, which was in pharmaceutical research and development, later years in pharmaceutical research and development in the US. But I worked globally with numerous pharmaceutical companies as clients. And I was running clinical trials for them, and that included Pfizer also. But I left that job. I worked in drugs. I actually never worked in vaccines, and I only, tangentially was involved in some biologics. But most of my work was in drugs, which are heavily regulated, obviously, both in US and in EU, not so much in Russia. So I knew about the regulations and all the health rules and stuff, and I actually never observed any malfeasance by government agencies. In fact, I observed a lot of actions to remove drugs from the market when they were producing side effects, especially cardiovascular. That was my focus. And I also seen numerous drug failures in drug development because, again, they couldn't meet the standards. And so the companies would terminate them because they were they're not safe. So I thought, wow, this is great. The system works sort of, and I trusted it overall. And then, so when I retired, I was, doing nothing, skiing, mountain biking. But then this 2020 started, and I was confused like everybody else. I believed for a few weeks, I believed it was real. I wasn't very worried. Just like Debbie, I think we kind of connected because we're similarly minded. Just like Debbie, we don't have TV. I didn't have social media. I didn't read news on the internet. I found it overall stupid. And so I'm not brainwashed. I'm not propagandized. And then they come on TV and they start telling you, oh, this virus, and I was like, well, I don't see anybody ill, and it doesn't seem like a big deal. So why are they hysterical? And then so I didn't pay attention to it. It was spring. We went to Napa Valley. We were mountain biking. It's gorgeous, so I'm like, okay. And then they started doing this heavy suppression of hydroxychloroquine first, and then ivermectin and other different generic protocols. And that became to me a big stop because I was familiar with hydroxychloroquine and its safety profile. And also specifically, they were assigning to it a problem that was my sole area of expertise at the time. It was QT prolongation, so electrophysiological QT prolongation, and that can, in certain very, very severe situations, induce sudden cardiac death. And I knew for sure that drug didn't have it because it was my job to study these drugs for these issues. Yeah. So I knew for sure that was not true. And then when I heard the FDA regulators saying the same thing, I was like, they know, because you have to realize there was a whole area inside of FDA headed by Dr. Norman Stockbridge, who just resigned, which was studying that particular issue, and they knew for sure that that drug was safe. And then they're coming out and lying. And this was the first time my jaw was on the floor. And I was like, okay, there's something's really bad going on. And from then on, I started investigating and started looking. Also, I became very, very concerned when they started pushing mRNA as prophylactic vaccine. And that was another big moment for me, because I knew it was inherently very dangerous. It was super toxic. There was a big scandal few years before, like I forget the exact year, maybe 2008 or 9, when in London there was a gene therapy, small first in human study, and they killed several subjects and severely injured others. And that had never happened in my professional career, because everything was so careful. By the time you get to human studies, we would never have anything like this. And so it was a huge scandal for the entire industry. And so for me, that became very memorable. I was like, this is very dangerous. I looked into the category to understand what type of side effects it can have, or what type of risks. And I knew this was never going to be for broad audience. At the time, they said it was developed for cancer, like terminal cancer and some really severe conditions. And I thought, well, maybe if somebody's already dying, it's something that they could try. But for, like healthy people or children or pregnant women, no way. And yet here they're pushing it as if it's a vaccine. So that for me, I was like a hard stop. And then I started.
Sasha, did you talk about this with your colleagues? I mean, if you're a cop, you hang out with cops. If you're a military person, you hang out with the military. I mean, you're a highly educated medical professional. I mean, did you feel alone, or did you say, hey, did you?
I tried.
What's going on here? I mean.
Yeah, that still is shocking to me, that how few of us actually spoke up on this topic. Still, like after 5 years. But at that time, I was like, this is just like insane, right? And I go to, we already moved, so I already was out of the industry, and we moved to Nevada, where not a lot of drug professionals hang out. But I talked to a couple of them, and I tried actually in one case to, with the person who runs his own company, and I was like, guys, you should actually tell your staff. And they wouldn't. I was like, I have this data. I already had data from VAERS, and I was like, can I discuss this with your staff? And they wouldn't let me. Although they also then did not do the vaccine mandate for the company, which was the best I could have accomplished. Is like we prevented that company from having a vaccine mandate. But even a few of my friends who I worked with and very closely, also worked in clinical trials, they went and injected themselves. And I was like, why did you do this? And anyway, it was terrible. The only thing, like, my family, nobody got injected, and, we were not going to. But people that I talked to most of the time did not listen to me. The only people who actually like immediately listened to me is this neighbor who's a farmer and his wife. And they came over one night. We were like having dinner, and my husband and I, and we talked about it. And my husband's also from the pharma industry, from the same area. And we were like, don't take those things. And they're like, okay. And then like a year later, a couple of years later, they came back and they were like, well, thank you for telling us because this is terrible.
Sasha, your central thesis dovetails with Debbie Lerman's, and that is that COVID was a military operation. You've done some fascinating research. You spoke about somebody called, is it James Giordani from around 2017?
Yeah, James Giordano, he is neuroscientist, I think. Well, he claims to be neuroscientist. He is he's affiliated with the academic institution, but his main job is, I would call it propagandizing military and military cadets in particular. And so he's, he's like a salesman for new military tech that we have and future neuroweapons that we're going to develop and so forth. And I've listened to several of his lectures. One is like an hour-long presentation at West Point, and he's going through numerous, it's kind of like snippets of different types of technologies that you can have in neuroweapons. I mean, I can't remember them all, but I listened to most of it, and I tried to check every so he'll give you a little advertisement. Oh, here's this, and it's kind of like a sales pitch for a new startup. And you look at it, and I've done startups, and so I know due diligence. It's you have to go. They'll give you a pitch. Here's this thing. It can fly. It can like make coffee. It's whatever. All these features. Here's the value proposition. And then you go and start digging and looking, like, is it real? Can it fly? Can it like make coffee? And who owns the IP and so forth. And I checked out a couple of those things, and they're nowhere close to anything done at scale even. So he is giving you kind of a futuristic look, which is futuristic look at sci-fi most of the time.
But why is he important?
Because
and maybe with the same answer, why do you describe it as a military operation? Because you could say many different social control, ideological control. Why do you focus on military operation?
Well, the military, because it is military. So like overall for COVID, it's Debbie and I have compiled this dossier recently, and this was primary objective of our collaboration is to demonstrate that it is a military operation across the world, because the militaries are in charge, and it's all done under military law, as opposed to is a public health event. So everyone was told it's a public health event, and they shoved public health authorities in every country in front of you being spokespeople as if it is a public health event. But what they did immediately in the US and all the countries that we've profiled, and now we actually received a lot of feedback from readers from many, many additional countries, it's the same thing. They put immediately the countries organized themselves like for war, and not just any war, but specifically for a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear attack. It's called CBRN. And so they invoked the legal structure and organized the government as if we were attacked by a CBRN agent. And that happened simultaneously all over the world. Now, this shows to me that whatever they are representing as a CBRN agent attack is also a lie, because CBRN agent attacks are localized. So for example, when they threw bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was it a global event? No, not even an all Japan event. It was just Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Did it last like 10 years? No. But now they're claiming that we have COVID simultaneously all over the world, and it's a CBRN attack of some sort. And it's going to last now for 10 years because recent outgoing Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra extended the same emergency declaration until end of 2029. So this tells you that it's not a public health event. They're invoking CBRN frameworks, but it's not a CBRN agent either.
But does that explain also why then the DOD took over the whole corona response in the US?
Yeah, yes, exactly. So the DOD was put in charge. Again, the public was lied to and said, oh, it's just because logistics. And then when I got the documents so there were productions of documents from Brooke Jackson's case first. I saw the organizational structure that they produced for Operation Warp Speed, and it was very clear. And that was funny because they made this org chart. Typically, org chart is kind of like a pyramid, right? But they turned it on the side, so it's not so obvious. But on the side, there was the head of the pyramid was on the side, and it was the Department of Defense as the chief operating officer, and HHS was only a science advisor. So while they were telling us, oh, it's a public health event, I'm like, well, why is then HHS not the chief operating officer? Why are they only an advisor?
I'd like to maybe push back a little bit. Jeremy, in South Africa, did you sense that it was a military operation? Because in Russia, it certainly wasn't pitched as one at all. As a matter of fact, it was a health issue, and you know.
Well,
in my
let me
personal
answer. Well,
opinion, let me finish.
on,
Let me finish. No, in Russia, we really didn't take it very seriously. Really, I mean,
Well, Russia,
maybe the first 6 weeks, you know, because there were lockdowns and everybody was there was a lot of official communication about what we should do and what shouldn't. But then when people realized, well, just as Sasha said, I mean, where are the dead bodies? Okay, elderly people were dying. Elderly people tend to die. So,
yes.
But I did not sense, and maybe it was such a psych op that I didn't realize it, but the military didn't have a high profile. Is my fact
well, let me just quickly jump in there, Peter. On the evening that our president announced South Africa going into lockdown, I think it was a 7 o'clock announcement. He said, I think it was like a Wednesday or something, and he said, I can't remember exactly. I think he said it was this coming Friday or whatever. The country will be going into full-scale lockdown. That evening, I think within 2 hours, I received WhatsApp videos from neighboring areas with military vehicles driving with armed gunmen on it, going through the suburbs, starting to shout at people, and starting to not shoot randomly, but just be very threatening. So that was the very first thing that I remember seeing was military presence. I didn't see it personally, but I saw videos of it.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe just to finish my point. What we were getting, the World Health Organization says, the World Health Organization proposed, we got that line all of the time. We're just following protocols from the World Health Organization. And there was a lot of angst here is that, well, what do they know? I mean, there's this typical skepticism here. And they went through all the protocols. What is it? I'm very dyslexic. What are the barcodes? They're called the square ones with all the dots and all of that.
QR codes.
Yeah, QR codes. They started down that path. And at the time, I was not a Russian citizen. And they forgot us. They forgot all the foreigners. So we couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't get on the metro. We couldn't go to cafes. And then, say, you forgot about us. Okay. And then like 10 days later, we were integrated into the system. 2 days after I was integrated in the system, they just said, just forget it. And then they got rid of it. I mean, for 2 weeks, we're going to these codes and all, and then forget it. And then they
I suspect, Sasha, you're going to say that Russia was not in the same.
No, of course not. Yes. Yeah. So this is.
I can certainly
just global.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, can I just make a few comments about Europe and the military dimension, because I very strongly agree with what Sasha has said. I live in Paris. The French president, when he went on air to announce the lockdown, the first one, he very famously said, "We are at war. We are at war." He kept repeating this phrase, "We are at war." In Britain, where I'm from, the British Army, the Chief of Staff of the British Army took a prominent role. They built hospitals. They also took a prominent role in countering disinformation.
Yes.
This is in March and April 2022. And more recently, and I don't want to anticipate what you might be driving towards, Sasha, but more recently in this country, in the Netherlands, we have discovered that there are secret NATO obligations imposed on all member states of NATO, which new governments are informed of by the secret services when they take office. This is what happened here in the Netherlands last year, a few weeks after they took office. And why do we know this? Because a remark was made by the current Dutch Minister of Health, who said that she wanted to implement this or that measure, but couldn't do so because of these NATO obligations. So yes, let's carry on with you, Sasha.
Yeah,
well, it just proves my point. It's the Western world, NATO world.
Yes.
Look at all of the extreme reactions. Where did you find
them? These are not extreme reactions. So reactions are not like they're not extreme. There are no mistakes being made here. So everybody on one side, it's being propagandized as public health events, botched public health events, a little bit overreach of the government, masking maybe lockdowns were necessary, and so they're now trying to manage the narrative away from military operation to a botched public health event. But I'm telling you, no mistakes were made, and I'll come back to Russia, but. As far as the Western world, so NATO alliances, yes, it was coordinated through the NATO for sure. We provide evidence throughout, including the remarks of your health minister. The whole dossier is organized, actually. It's a very short executive summary. It's only facts. We removed our interpretations. And then we have listing for each country that we have as far as which agencies, military and intelligence, were involved that we know of, key people that we know of, and key dates with announcements. So, and I know most of this information for the United States. So in the United States, the framework that was involved, as I said, it's as if it's a CBRN attack, although it's a fake CBRN attack. I received from a whistleblower a Zoom conversation. I only released audio of it, of two executives from AstraZeneca at an executive meeting. And it's Pascal Soro, who is the CEO of AstraZeneca, and Mark Esser, who is a VP of monoclonal antibodies. So they recorded this at the end of 2020 when they were celebrating the, job well done, Operation Warp Speed, and they were discussing how this started. And they said that they were approached by the Department of Defense, DARPA, which is Advanced Research and Development Agency so it's like new tech within DoD, specifically Colonel Matt Hepburn, who approached them, and he said that, we're starting this consortium of pharmaceutical companies with Department of Defense, working on biodefense technologies and especially vaccines. And the goal is for when we, DoD, identify a new virus, then you, pharma companies, will make vaccines and therapeutics for it within 60 days. And at that point, Mark Esser, being experienced pharmaceutical research and developer, said, I thought it was science fiction, because it is science fiction. You can't make products within 60 days in pharmaceuticals. You can only make poison. But then, of course, they love participating in government money is great. For a few years, they play science. They were working on it was all called pan-influenza models. We have contracts for that, for it also. And then what happens, Mark Esser also said on this conversation, and then we received a phone call from Matt Hepburn from DARPA telling us on February 4th, 2020, telling us that COVID was declared a national security threat. Yeah. And that we need to switch to COVID. And this is, this is when there were practically no cases, a handful, maybe 100 cases in the world, 200 cases in the world, who knows? They were also all secretly diagnosed by secret methodology that nobody had, no independent party had access to. In the US, it was only CDC, and you had to send all these samples to CDC, even though they claimed that on January 9th. So the timeline, on January 9th, somebody uploads genetic code into GenBank, claiming that this is a novel pathogenic, very dangerous virus from China. And this is nonsense. First of all, nobody knows. If you read through biodefense literature or virology literature, and I'm publishing it a lot, even from Ralph Baric himself. I've profiled several of his reports and books. He himself says, we don't know, we can't predict pathogenicity or virulence from genetic sequence. There is no technology today in the world to predict this. Yet, on January 9th, they upload some code and they say, it's a super dangerous virus. We need to announce CBRN all over the world simultaneously.
And it's from China.
And it's from China also, yeah. So from January 9th, then February 4th, Matt Hepburn somehow has an authority to place a phone call to a consortium of hundreds of pharmaceutical companies, global hundreds of pharmaceutical companies, telling them that it's a national security threat. So now everything is classified. And the National Security Council in the US becomes in charge of COVID policy. So that's the document that Debbie found ultimately. It's since been removed, but we have a copy of it. They replaced it with something else. But the original document she found, and it clearly has the, again, org chart showing that it's National Security Council that's in charge of the policy, and everything else, and HHS is advisory and science role. So National Security Council is advisory body to the US president, at the time Trump, which has all the heads of intelligence and military, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Vice President, and all the spooks and military agencies, and no representatives of public health. So and that's how they organize for war. So, but the public was never told till today. Nobody knows. Nobody's like, they talk to us and like, you guys are conspiracists.
Sasha, let's talk about Trump for a second. So in 2020, a very interesting year.
Jeremy read my mind.
Yeah, so Trump was in the White House and he was informed of this. So let's just assume he didn't know what was going on. But what we do know is that Matt Pottinger hires Deborah Birx, who comes in and tells him, we're taking over everything, you have no say. Is that correct?
Yeah, it seems that way. I mean, I don't have direct evidence of it, but it seems that way. It seems that, so what I can say from the videos that I've profiled and looking at the documents and so forth, I think, and this is just my guess, okay, based on the timelines, the DOD went ahead with their plan of COVID. I don't know, it may have been even before January or so forth, but February 4th was an important date because that's when they made that place that outgoing call. And so what's interesting, then subsequent declarations of COVID emergencies that are now being extended 12, 13 times were all retro. So they were made from March 2020 on, but they were all retroactively dated to February 4th. Because I think that's when they said, oh, we told other people then. And so we need all these, so especially pharma, and because PrEP Act gives them full liability protection, that protection needs to start from the day that we told them to do this. So that's why February 4th is so important. And so at that time, it was all DOD and spooks, I guess, Deborah Birx's State Department. So so all of them together were doing this. At some point, they told Trump. So what we've seen, I think it was Jeffrey Tucker from Brownstone actually did a pretty good article on this. He went through Trump's tweets at that time, and he says he did a U-turn, like 180 turn between March 9th and like 11th. Because right before that, he was tweeting no lockdowns, no nothing. Oh no, this is hoax. And so obviously he wasn't read in yet.
Similar thing happened to Boris Johnson in Britain.
Yeah, right. So same people. Yeah, so you could see patterns like this throughout. They didn't all catch up at the same time, and then somewhere on March 10th or 11th, he was read in, and then from then on is 180-degree turn. Like, oh, terrible pandemic, we're going to lock down. Also in the US, a bunch of states already issued emergency declarations. So because it's not, I think a lot of states are under this cabal umbrella anyway, and the governors are controlled. So the governors went ahead and issued their own emergency declarations ahead of federal. And so by that time, Trump was like, they told him, and I think 30 some states already had emergencies in place. And so he was like, well, now we're going to announce this national, and he put FEMA in charge. And then from then on, he started being very, very pro. But also even on March 20th, he's still surprised by Mike Pompeo comment, and this is on video, and many people commented on it. So at some press conference, Mike Pompeo says, we're in a live operation or live exercise. And Trump is visibly surprised by it. He's like, what? Oh, you should have told us. You should have told us.
Well, Sasha, I keep seeing COVID military operation. What was the point of the operation? To see if they could do it, make a lot of money off it, subvert when democracy, quote unquote, is inconvenient. This is something that you turn on. Was it a beta run?
Well, so it is coordinated through NATO, so that it's all coordinated through militaries. So let me just give the facts, and then I can give you interpretation. So as I said, in the U.S., it's the organization like for war, and all the allied countries organized like for war the same way. They all have identical laws, by the way, almost identical language in the law, which had been pre-made over years. So the law itself is evidence of premeditation, because they've all kind of harmonized their law, US with Europe, with UK, with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, established all these pandemic preparedness plans, practiced them many times, established Office of Pandemic Preparedness and Response everywhere, then pulled the trigger, and then they started purchase. So like when they announced Operation Warp Speed, the whole plan was create misery, total misery and destruction of economy until vaccines, right? Which is another nonsense, not a public health thing. You never do that. But they said, no, everyone, total, kids don't go to school, businesses shut down, masking everywhere.
If they knew it wasn't a medical health issue, then what were they trying to do? That was the cover story. So
it's a cover story. But it's a cover story. Their goal was to push these mRNA shots on the entire population. That's definitely one of the goals. So that's why they created massive misery, suppression, censorship until vaccines. Then they announced vaccines, and they purchased vaccines under defense production authorities everywhere, just like they buy weapons. In the US, it's a Defense Production Act, OTA, other transaction authority contracts. There are similar structures all over the world. I know even in Ukraine they have OTA. So OTA is used everywhere, and it's used for secrecy and oftentimes for purchasing weapons, because you don't have to disclose a lot of things. There's no accountability. There's no IP disclosure. And they gave them full liability protection. So then push all the vaccines on everyone. Then go very draconian pushing mandates, job mandates, school mandates, all that. So they were trying to inject as many people as possible. They've succeeded to like 75% of the Western world.
Yeah, but I don't know if maybe I wasn't clear, but towards what end? To show that they could do it? I mean, is this a prototype to, for another emergent? Let's see how the mice react in the trap, okay? And COVID was it. I believe that, okay? But, again, to demonstrate that they can subvert this, the nominal cover of democratic institutions, because this is I'm going to stick with my position. I mean, this is a Western world thing. This
not is just Western world. Russia.
I think that's the model of it right here, because there's a lot of deviation. Obviously, you're an expert on this, but
China did lock down.
The other experiences are different, at least slightly different.
So in the Western world, they did everything together and very, unanimously, because, as I said, they have already military alliance, and they have this, they're not epidemic. It's a biodefense, biosecurity infrastructure and alliances already. So that's why they're so choreographed in the Western world. Russia and China also did that, but just because they're not parts of those alliances, they did with some differences, right? Now, the push for vaccines was very hard in Russia too. They even had we didn't have QR codes, but in Russia there's more features.
Wasn't it called Sputnik?
Sputnik, yeah, but Sputnik is a knockoff of AstraZeneca, very poisonous juice. Okay, and so while there were some differences, the differences I can say are attributable to the differences in structures, like military alliances and biodefense. Now, why they did this, I can't really speculate. We need to put them on trial. My point is, put them on trial, put them under investigation, ask them those questions. Now, I can guess that, yes, it's to some extent a practice run, but a really, dress rehearsal, because
dress rehearsal for what?
For next one, because they need to do several more, including crashing the food supply. So today, while they're fear mongering and requiring in some hospitals testing for avian flu, which is another BS virus, They are very hard going after animal supply, like chicken farms. Chickens are being slaughtered in the millions. Here in my very prestigious community here on Lake Tahoe, near premier ski resort, we don't have eggs. No eggs, because they've succeeded with the chicken pandemic. And the next they're going after, on the other side of the mountain here, have thousands of heads of cattle, beautiful cattle in pasture. And they're claiming that those guys now have avian flu.
Yeah, just to play into that, just to feed into what you're saying, you might have heard that our government just recently signed a bill to take away farms.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then after they've done that, they'll come back to people with some other thing. And their trial, right, you can see through social media, they always put in some sort of a trial balloon, right? So this week it's going to be, tuberculosis is spiking in Kansas.
Monkeypox or mpox, whatever they call it, that's getting flagged more and more often, I've noticed. Yes. I mean, in the U.S., it's in the U.S. mpox has come to America. I saw that like 2 or 3 days ago.
Yeah. So they will do these headlines, which are BS, total BS. They throw it into social media to see how much of a response are we getting. Is it really sticking or not? And if it's not sticking, well, let's move to chickens for now, and then we'll come back to this. And so you see it all the time. Like once you see it, it's obvious. They're just testing, A/B testing, right? This one's going to stick.
You obviously come across this big story with USAID and the huge media propaganda apparatus. I mean, I was aware of it on the margins. I obviously didn't know all of the details, but it seems to me that, the story for a lot of conservatives in the United States, see, this was the Democratic Party, how they were trying to manipulate foreign policy against domestic policy. And I think that, sure, that's reasonable, but your thesis plays into it perfectly, where you have this apparatus that is coming along. Independent media in Ukraine said this. Independent media in Moldova said this. It's that's this sham scam of USAID. I think it's perfect for exactly what you're saying.
And that's what they were doing. And they pumped even more money into propaganda. Actually, the propaganda apparatus was set up way before they started this COVID exercise.
Right.
And propaganda and censorship and misinformation, so that they could immediately, even, I tried to publish my initial findings on VAERS. I was trying to publish them on Twitter. I was immediately banned. I was totally suppressed. There were swarms of these operatives, right, coming in and doing all kinds of BS in your feed and smearing you. And so I was then shut down on Twitter completely. Banned. And at the time I had a discussion with I come from the Soviet Union, and I had a discussion with my husband, and I was like, oh yeah, they're just centrally coordinating this. And he's European, he's from Finland, and he's like, no, it's independent. No, they can't. They probably have maybe a phone call with each other. I'm like, no, this is a central command and control. I'm very familiar with this. And now he's like, yeah, you were right. But yes, they had a central command and control to go after people, especially people with professional credentials. Like Mike Eden was immediately suppressed, me, a bunch of doctors. Then at some point, I found there was, they had these agencies, small cybersecurity shops, conveniently located next to Pentagon, that were they were profiling people who were speaking against COVID. And at this particular one that was FOIA'd, this shop was hired for New York City Health Department to study local news in New York City. I live on the other side of the country. I don't live in New York City. And this is 900-page report that was FOIA'd. Well, a couple of pages were dedicated to me, a whole bunch of people from all over the world. And I was like, what does this have to do with New York City Health Department? Well, nothing. It was just the USAID operation pretending to be, New York City Health Department hiring this cybersecurity company. Also, the cybersecurity company, which I myself profiled, they had some interesting services offered on their website. They were offering services of creating fake media social accounts, which is perfectly legal, I guess, for things like political campaign management. you know, and this is all over the place, all over. Every university had one, every employer. It's so pervasive, and they spend, I said, much more money on that than on anything else.
Yeah,
it is true that the apparatus of propaganda and the fight against disinformation predates COVID, and in many ways, with hindsight, seems to anticipate it. I can give you, perhaps you know them already, but some dates on this. As after Trump was elected in 2016, in the dying days, in the last days of his presidency, Obama signed I think it's called the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act, 26th, I think, of December, 2016. Shortly after that, in Britain, the British Army created a secret brigade, the 77 Brigade, which whose goal was to penetrate social networks and chat rooms and things in order to influence opinion. And that, by the way, was one of the things that I mentioned a few moments ago, the head of the British Army, was one of the things he boasted about in March 2020. He said that, we're very active countering disinformation, which was an incredible thing to say. He made that statement in early April 2020, when, as you've just said yourself, Sasha, there wasn't any disinformation about COVID, because most people, including, I think, many of the people on this show now, probably believed it in the first few weeks. So the idea that there needed to be a fight against disinformation, even less directed by the secret brigade within the army, was absolutely incredible, because nobody was disagreeing with it at the time.
Yeah, but they knew that they will have a pushback, because what they're doing is lying, and they know that they're lying.
Yeah.
And so they created this misinformation, and this is such an Orwellian term, misinformation, because it's the truth that they don't like. That's truth that counter to their narrative, to their lying narrative.
Yeah.
But they're declaring it misinformation, and on that basis, they also have written a lot of these laws preceding this, that they now can't go after these people, and that still has not been resolved. We're still on the same framework.
Sasha, what do you think Trump knew, and what do you think he knows now?
God, Jeremy and I are on the same wavelength here. 2 different continents. My goodness.
Well, again, I don't know. This question needs to be asked of him in the context of investigation. But it's so from what we were able to glean from his talks and his switch of opinion and so forth. As I said, my theory is that he didn't know until about March 10th or 11th. Then the spooks and military came in and read him in, and probably told him a story that it's a dangerous biological weapon developed in China, unleashed on us. They attacked us. We have to respond as a CBER, and there's all these laws, and it's national. So we're declaring national security threat. I think it's plausible that somebody sat down with him and told him this, and then he made the switch, and then but he's not stupid, right? So it's impossible that he doesn't know today what actually happened.
But Sasha, sorry to interrupt, but it was a dangerous biological weapon developed in China, paid for by the Pentagon.
No, it wasn't. No, nope. So
go ahead.
That's
because
why we'll never. Actually, I had a question, but I'm going to change it now for Sasha.
Sorry, which part don't you agree with? That it was dangerous, or that it was paid for? By
it wasn't. How should I say it? It's a poison. Okay, let's put it this way.
There was no biological pathogen. That's what you're saying.
Biological. So the problem is and I also have since then read tons of literature, including old ones from the Soviet Union and current ones. There are textbooks published on it by NIH as recent as 2018. There's a huge textbook on biological weapons and profiling different technologies and what they can do, science literature. So overall conclusion, biological weapons are really difficult to make. They've been attempted since 1400s, actually. You can make them sort of, you can create some sort of biological poison from rotten brains of something. The problem is that nature denatures very quickly. So once you release it, it will go into nothing, just in the air and the sunlight will kill it in a couple of minutes. So to prevent that, they started doing like encapsulating them in chemicals. It only goes so far. Again, denatures quickly. So what DOD over time went to, and I also have an article about this, so-called biomimetics. It's just a fancy word to say it's a chemical weapon. It's chemical that can induce symptoms that are sort of, you can ascribe to viruses. And they really like that, because you can really fake pandemics with this. And this is what James Giordano is talking about too, to the cadets. There's a lecture of him where he describes how to fake pandemics with precisely this method. So he says, we distribute a drug, a drug, that creates some sort of weird symptoms. We really like the central nervous system effect, because people tend to freak out and think it's something novel and unpredictable. And I think something like this was used. And typically they use also legal chemicals. So something that legally can be stored and transported and sold, and usually sold like in agriculture or oil and gas production and things like that. So chemicals that, if it's stored somewhere, nobody's going to question it. It's for legitimate business. But then they can.
You don't think that there was any gain of function research being paid for by the Americans in
no. So gain of function. Yeah, actually, I have an article. I just finished an article on gain of function. Should come out shortly, and it's not the first one. I've done several. So gain of function is another fakery. Okay, so and I get attacked on this by many people who I made viruses in the lab. And my question to them immediately, well, did you make anything super pathogenic and deadly? He's like, no, that's not allowed. I can't do that. It's too dangerous. I'm like, well, you know what? Since like first grade in school, this is how we would scare each other. I have a dragon under my bed. Can you show it to me? Oh, no, it would be too dangerous. And so this is how they do it. So they claim that, for example, the government of US and the government of Russia both have samples of really deadly smallpox locked somewhere in a very secure facility. But we have them. Can you have verification? No. Is it infectious? Did you demonstrate that you can cause a pandemic with it? No. We just have to trust them that they do.
Well, Sasha, I'd like to ask you about Novichok, but maybe that would for another conversation.
And Novichok is one of the. So Novichok is one of those things. It's 2 agricultural chemicals that they mix inside, and you have Novichok. So this is a principle that they use today. Is they have legal chemicals from which they can mix quickly, aerosolize, put on subways. That's a very preferred method. Put into HVAC systems in large buildings. That's why New York City had such a gigantic spike of COVID, and like London and a couple of other large cities, but nowhere else. So somehow COVID prefers, these large, tall buildings and subways. It's a very special virus. It doesn't cross the streets.
Yeah.
So there are all these indications, including from like all-cause mortality data, that it was, I had it in 22, and so I know what they're talking about. Yes, it was extremely weird. It was CNS. It was like poisoning. It was nasty, but treatable with normal. I was just drinking like lemon tea and taking.
I've had it 3 times.
Yeah, so I believe I can't prove it to you, but I believe it's some sort of a chemical which they simulated these symptoms with. And there may be multiple versions of it. Now,
we're rapidly running out of time. Speeding up to the present here, Trump has his bulldog, Elon Musk, digging here, digging there, exposing this. All that. Do you have any hope whatsoever? Because Jeremy and I were thinking about Trump. I don't like him. I don't think Jeremy likes him very much either. But do you think that we'll get to the origin story? Because one could say, maybe it wasn't by design, but as a result, it undermined his first term as president. Okay,
it's a lot of gatekeeping.
Yeah. I mean, it's very selective what's being exposed right now. Very selective. It's being exposed. Too many of my friends are, like, oh my God, we're going to find out what really happened. I just like, calm down. They're going to let us know what they want us to know. because they're fighting political battles and they're looking for money and all of that. It's not noble. Let's put it that way. Okay.
Well, no, yeah.
But do you think in an ideal world, which doesn't exist, obviously, do you think that there's going to be an impetus for people like yourself? There were arguments out there, maybe, like Rand Paul, he's tried to do attempt things, and other a small number of congressmen. But do you think the origin story and the kind of story that you've been telling will get greater currency under this administration?
Well, my story, I don't have any hope really, because what they're, as I said, and I knew this they were going to manage to this story. So I can show you my publications in 22, I think. So a while back, over a year ago, I published an article saying, now you're allowed to talk about virus was made in China, the bioweapon was made in China, right? Because they always had these two layers of lies, because they knew the first layer of lie will become untenable. The first layer of lie was zoonotic jump from the market, and you can't say anything else, and you will be kicked off media if you say anything else. Then I said, well, now we know that you can talk about China virus, but actually it was a chemical deployment, and I wrote it over a year ago. And so now they're managing to this story. It was China virus. China attacked us with a biological weapon. So of course we had legitimate reasons to declare a national security threat. So now he just announced that Anna Paulina Luna is going to be in charge of release of all these classified information including about origins of COVID. I guarantee you what's going to come out of it is, well, it was Fauci who gave grant to Wuhan, and those bad people together with Fauci conspired to create a biological weapon, which is we prohibited and Obama prohibited, and but that's just because bad Fauci. But guess what? He's already pardoned. Oh, okay. Well, now everybody can go home.
Yeah, and again, they'll protect the DOD.
Of course, not a peep is going to be said about DOD.
Yeah, we live in the world where years later, well, mistakes were made.
Mistakes were made. Yeah, but there was,
they were good people. But they were good people.
Yeah, they really just tried, but made some mistakes. And it's 60 years ago, they would never do it again. No. Yeah.
Just to quickly add to something you were saying earlier about these hotspots where there were these spikes you're talking about in whatever illnesses, Sasha. Here in South Africa, our excess mortality in 2020 was lower than in previous years. In fact, we didn't have any high numbers of excess mortality, but we had a lot of billboards telling us that it was deadly and terrible. And here's the other interesting thing. A virus is supposedly contagious, and this one we were told was very contagious and very deadly. Now, as you might know, in South Africa, we have a lot of poverty-stricken areas with literally millions of people living in very confined spaces with no gaps between their homes. Nothing happened. Same
in San Francisco, where all the homeless live. I thought, I was like, there's got to be some carnage there. No, they're all working around with their cell phones and stuff. Nothing happened. Yeah. So, but the deaths of COVID. So I also published an article where morbidity and mortality need to be evaluated separately. Morbidity was this something, you got poisoned with something. It wasn't deadly. It was dangerous for some people. But morbidity was almost all attributed to COVID murder protocols. And the US, they were extremely harsh, and they still continue them in the hospitals, by the way, today. Yeah. So they were killing people in the hospitals in huge numbers. And so now we have this propaganda that, US is such poor health. We have this health crisis. So MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. We need to solve the health crisis, pointing to, we have 4% of the population, but we had 16% of deaths. That's how efficient our hospitals were at killing people with remdesivir, false diagnosing them with PCR, putting them in the lockdown military-operated COVID wards, where my mother-in-law was put in. We busted her out there, but and then dehydrating them on purpose, and then removing food on purpose, not going there, neglecting them, bad sores, putting them on ventilators, which is $40,000 a head, plus 20% bonuses if you give them remdesivir, to all the staff, and killing them off with remdesivir, which shuts down kidneys. That's how efficient they were. At 4% population, we achieved 16% of the deaths.
Okay, so Sasha, we have 4.5 minutes left. How successful would you gauge this military operation, and what did they learn? And what from what they learned, how will they improve their average next time they do this?
Well, I think they were overall successful. I think they didn't reach the numbers that they wanted of injected people. In some places it's more, in some places it's less. Again, in the US, it's all over the place. Some places resisted completely, as low as 40% in some states, which is great in my opinion. So that was like
1%, 1.5% here.
In South Africa, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So so that target they may have missed, but on the other hand, it's also a huge part of the population. They also missed the point that now with the with internet, with independent media and people like us, so they didn't anticipate that people like us will arise. They thought that they were going to control it all with PlayStations, and certainly you can see that there's a lot of PlayStations, which they are also now trying to bring back to the fold through sponsorships and other entanglements.
Do you think that was one of their goals, to see which among us would stick our heads up?
Yes, of course. Yes. They were going, and so they had this plan of. That's why they had the plan of misinformation. How we're going to suppress it. They had the second layer of lies. What are we going to say after all of this is found out? And so those are the learning experiences. Also in the US, they practiced complete removal of rights, including this J6, if you've heard about it. I mean, that's a whole separate discussion, but that was very, very similar to what Stalin did. And you would say, oh my God, this is America. How can you compare it to Stalin regime? It's exactly what Stalin did. It's basically completely just broad sweep of people who did absolutely nothing, were charged with a trespass on the lawn, and they were kept without representation, without a trial, without any rights for years in solitary confinement. So absolute removal of rights, and see if that's going to create any sort of legal impediment to us. And I think that went completely smoothly, like nothing.
Sasha, did you think you would leave the Soviet Union as a dissident and be a dissident in America?
Yeah, actually, I wasn't a dissident in the Soviet Union.
I'm just joking.
Yeah, and I left after the Soviet Union collapsed, and I thought, this is great, this is amazing, And a lot of my friends also from the former Soviet Union still can't believe this. I am trying to explain to them what happened, and they're like, no, we have constitution, we have democracy, we have. I'm like, no, you don't. So anyway, yeah. So that was a demonstration of how to remove constitution, governance, rights, anything under this framework. Specifically under COVID military framework, because one of the J6 defendants was also told by a judge when he asked him, I have a right to fair and speedy trial. The judge told him, no, you don't, because the Sixth Amendment has been suspended because of COVID-19, meaning the Constitution has been suspended. It hasn't been unsuspended yet. We're still under the same framework.
What a wonderful precedent. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how many times I've said this before on this show, but how many times have we heard from people who've lived under the Soviet system or in one of the satellite regimes that it's all coming back? I mentioned it on this show a few weeks ago, and yet once again here we have Sasha corroborating that prism of analysis. Sasha, it's been absolutely wonderful listening to you. You have a Substack, right? We can follow you on that.
Yes, it's called Due Diligence and Art, or you can just search my name, sashalatypova.substack.com.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely encourage all our viewers to follow you, because I can tell that it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you. You're extremely intelligent, very well informed. You present your argument brilliantly. Thank you very much for giving us your time. Thank you, Jem. Thank you, Peter. And same time next week. All the best, everyone.
Baka.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye.